All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this AFI webinar on using the accountability framework to set clear nature, climate, and human rights goals. Thanks for joining. I think people are going to keep trickling in, but we'll get started. Before we start, a few housekeeping items today. The webinar is being recorded. The recording will be emailed to everyone who registered. Will also be available on the AFI website. We encourage audience questions throughout the webinar. Please use Zoom's Q&A function at any time to submit your questions for our speakers and upvote other questions that you would like to hear answered. We'll answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the webinar, and we'll also answer as many questions as we can in writing in the Q&A function there. After the webinar ends, you'll receive a post-event survey, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on how to make these webinars most useful for you. So please, if you have a moment, it'll pop up when you close the Zoom, or when the event ends. So please fill that out. Great. I think now that we can dive in. So I'm Leah Sandberg. I'm the lead scientist for global policy at the Rainforest Alliance and part of the Accountability Framework Initiative's backbone team. I'll be speaking today about the Accountability Framework's guidance on setting supply chain goals in the form of policies, commitments, and targets. Joining me is a fantastic set of speakers who will provide insight into how the commitments established in the framework are embedded in broader climate and nature goals. So Autumn Fox is the Climate Sustainability Senior Manager at Mars. Martha Stevenson is the Senior Director for Forest Strategy and Research at WWF and is a Senior Advisor to the Science Based Targets Initiative. And Marco Daldos Piri is an Associate for Natural Solutions at Systemiq and led the development of version 1 of the SBTi and land targets. So we'll get a chance to hear from all of our speakers shortly about their work in developing supply chain goals and targets, and definitely encourage everyone to add questions for them into the chat, and we'll be able to get to those towards the end of the webinar. So I'm going to start us off today by walking through how the accountability framework guides users in developing clear and ambitious commitments. The first three of the framework's core principles clearly lay out what should be included in strong commitments to protect ecosystems and human rights. In addition, the framework has operational guidance that allows these principles to be put into action and a step-by-step guide on how to write a strong supply chain policy. These commitments described in the framework can and should be set by companies at all stages of commodity supply chains. Through this guidance, the accountability framework has, over the past 4 years, become a leading reference for best practice in setting supply chain goals to protect ecosystems and human rights. So before I get into the details of what that guidance says, take a sec to talk about why the AFI places so much importance on these goals and why they matter. Next slide, please. So commitments serve a number of important functions for a company. They formalize intentions into specific time-bound sets of actions that can be operationalized and results that can be measured. They help articulate sustainability goals to the company's stakeholders, such as its buyers and investors, and clarify the company's expectations for its suppliers. And they support accountability and tracking of progress towards goals, both internally and externally. So while these policies and targets and commitments are just sort of a first step in this process, they're a really essential step to align expectations and support accountability. Next slide, please. So the framework covers 2 primary sets of commitments. First, company policy should include a commitment to eliminating deforestation and conversion of other natural ecosystems from the company's operations, supply chains, and financial investments. Now, deforestation is a type of conversion, so these commitments can either address all natural ecosystems together or address forests and non-forests separately. Either of these is fine, but we're asking that commitments be comprehensive in this way. The terms used, such as deforestation and conversion, should be clearly defined in the policy and should align with the definitions found in the framework. I'm going to go into a little more detail about the framework's guidance on setting no deforestation and no conversion commitments. There's a great deal more that can be found in the guidance, so feel free to ask questions or take a look at our materials after this. So for no deforestation commitments and no conversion commitments, the framework specifies, and you can go to the next slide, that strong commitments should include a cutoff date. So the cutoff date is the date after which conversion renders materials non-compliant with company commitments or external requirements. A cutoff date should be clearly stated for all commodities or for each commodity separately. And credible cutoffs will never be later in time than the date that the policy is issued. They should align with existing sectoral cutoff dates where possible, and for no deforestation commitments should not be later than 2020. We have a whole suite of guidance, operational guidance on cutoff dates. So there's a lot more there for clarifying that piece of the puzzle. In addition, next slide, no deforestation and no conversion commitments should also include a commitment to taking appropriate measures to support the long-term protection of ecosystems in the company's operations, as well as a commitment to conducting or supporting restoration or compensation in cases where social or environmental harms have occurred. And as before, we have additional guidance on what that entails as well. Next slide, please. So the framework also is clear that policies on protection of ecosystems should be accompanied by a commitment to respect internationally recognized human rights. And this is core principle 2 of the framework. This includes the rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, workers, and others who may be affected by company activities. And there's several operational guidance documents in the framework that provide a great deal more information on what this includes, including operational guidance on the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities, on workers' rights, and on free, prior, and informed consent. So commitments, next slide, please, to respect human rights should include carrying out operations consistent with internationally recognized human rights instruments and guidelines, conducting human rights due diligence, securing free, prior, and informed consent, providing or supporting remedy when social or environmental harms have occurred, stakeholder engagement, providing grievance mechanisms, and protecting environmental and human rights defenders. Advance, yeah, perfect, thanks. So for all of these commitments, the framework provides clear guidance on what a robust target should look like. So a key aspect of this is that supply chain goals should be comprehensive in scope. That is, they should apply across all segments of a company's business and all suppliers and sourcing geographies. And then finally, the core principle 3 of the framework says that all credible commitments should be time bound. Next slide, please. So this means they should have a clearly stated and ambitious target date and time bound milestones. So the AFI recommends that companies set or strengthen commitments to no deforestation and no conversion supply chains to include a target date that's as early as possible. We recommend no later than 2025 as best practice for making it clear that these targets are really a sort of an ambitious and top priority. So next slide, please. So the goals laid out in the framework, elimination of deforestation, ecosystem conversion, and associated human rights abuses are the foundation of global climate and nature targets. For companies that produce and source agricultural and forestry commodities, eliminating land use change is often the single most important step toward meeting goals for emissions reduction and biodiversity conservation. Because of the centrality of these issues, the commitments found in the accountability framework have been integrated into many other commitments and targets, including those of industry associations such as the Consumer Goods Forum and multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the Global Platform for Sustainable Natural Rubber. They've also been embedded into the requirements of the Science-Based Targets Initiative's forest, land, and agriculture targets, and the Science-Based Targets for Nature's Land Guidance. So the rest, I think, of what we're going to be doing today is really talking about how these commitments laid out in the framework have been embedded into other targets and commitments, have been built upon to really become a central goal for companies. But before we turn to our speakers to hear more about these targets, we have some questions for the audience. So take a turn for you, and more specifically for members of the audience who represent supply chain companies. So we have 3 quick polls for you to answer. They're going to pop up, and then we'll see the results. So we'll get a sense of where everyone is at on these issues. So for the first poll in question for audience members who represent supply chain companies, is your company part of an industry association or multi-stakeholder group that have collective policies or commitments on deforestation, conversion, and human rights? So take a second and pick the one that most applies to your organization, and then we'll see All right, I'll take one more minute. Go get your answers in. All right, let's see the results of this first one. So let's see, the greatest number was a no. My company is not associated with industry associations or multi-stakeholder groups with commitments or targets on these topics. 48%, 38% yes, so that's a pretty good split. And then 4% is working on it. So yeah, that's a great spread. So we've got folks all over the spectrum here on this one. All right, so the next question, is your company setting an SBTi flag target? So for audience members who represent a company, we've got 4 choices here for you. All right, one more second, get your answers in. All right, let's see the results on this one. That is about as even a spread as you could get. So really got folks in the audience sort of all across the range of engagement on SBTi. About a quarter is in the process of setting a target. A quarter is planning to but hasn't begun. A quarter of companies are feeling that they're not at this point able to set a flag target, and a little more than a quarter are saying it's not relevant to their company. So great, we've got good diversity here. All right, so last one. Again, for company members of the audience, how has your company engaged thus far with the SBT and land targets? So again, 4 options here for you. All right, one more second. All right, let's see. Let's see, so got a couple of people in the audience who are working with an organization that's planning to pilot the available version of the land targets. And then looks like everyone else is sort of split between sort of having some familiarity, having some relevance, not really considering yet. So this is great. I'm glad we've got a lot of diversity here. So we should have some good questions from companies at different stages of process on this. So definitely get in the Q&A as our speakers are talking, and we'll get everyone some information. All right, so thanks so much. And now that it's laid a little bit of the groundwork for the framework's principles and guidance on this topic, I'm excited to hear from our speakers. So I'm going to turn first to Autumn to talk about the goal setting processes that Mars has been engaged in.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. I'm Autumn Fox. I'm with Mars, Inc. I'm our Climate Sustainability Senior Manager, which basically means I'm on the corporate team looking after our commitments on climate, land use, and deforestation. So all very deeply related to the topic we have today. And I'm excited to be on this call because it links me back to why I originally got into sustainability, which was when I was in college and was doing some research on elk and how they respond to the disturbance of natural gas drilling. I got a chance to be on a small plane looking for radio colored elk. And I was really able to see how the landscape that below seemed so densely forested as you drove on the highways and roads and so remote actually was just crisscrossed with the development roads like the lines on a puzzle. And it really brought home to me the link between corporations and ecology. And I think AFI is really at the forefront of trying to figure out how we fix that link between corporations and ecology. So it's really amazing to be here. So how do we use AFI at Mars? I would say there's 3 key ways that we use AFI at Mars. So the first is really on our target and strategy development. The second is our policy development, and really as a key partner in collaboration spaces. So in terms of target and strategy development, just for the context, Mars is committed to deforestation and conversion-free supply chains by 2025 across our 5 key raw materials: cocoa, palm oil, beef, soy, and pulp and paper. And Mars has had that commitment for quite some time. Originally, Mars worked with the World Resources Institute to set SBTs or targets designed to be science-based and aligned with nature before SBTN even existed, right? And through that process, we developed our commitment on climate, our commitment to hold our land use flat, our commitment to sustainable water use in stressed watersheds, and our deforestation policy. And those commitments were really designed to work together holistically to address the planetary boundaries that are impacted by our company's operations, while having a critical few number of metrics so that we could really activate and focus on those issues. So, when we think about those targets, one of the ways that they're all interlinked is that, of course, like many agricultural companies, land use change emissions are very significant when we look at our GHG footprint. And we've always believed in looking at the entire footprint and including the entire footprint in our targets. We think that's really important to make sure that you're actually setting strategies that will address emissions effectively. And so land use change has always been in our targets, and it's a big contributor to our footprint. And so it's very clear for us that deforestation and conversion-free supply chains have a key link to delivering our commitments by 2025, future 5-year commitments, and our net zero by 2050 goal. It's, it's so significant that, stopping land use change and stopping deforestation and conversion is one of our 6 big bets when we think about our net zero roadmap. It's one of the critical few must-win areas for us to achieve net zero. So we're really serious about it, and the link is very clear. So in addition, having this AFI, inspired and informed deforestation and conversion-free commitment by 2025 is sort of this foundational element that just actually makes it pretty easy to take on other things, right? Because we have that as a foundation, we're ready when it comes to flag targets, to SBTN, to regulatory compliance, to disclosures like CDP and Forest 500. It at least gives us a step in the right direction on all of those and makes them somewhat less daunting. So it really drives value across many different sustainability platforms to have an AFI aligned commitment. And in particular, I wanted to share that when we're thinking, as many others are on the call, I saw quite a few in our group of being in the process of setting our flag target. When we're looking at setting our flag science-based targets, having this commitment makes it easy to comply with that part of the requirement, right? We know that's something that our company is already committed to, and that's not an obstacle for us in setting a flag target. So that's how AFI helps us in the target and strategy development space. In terms of policy development, it is incredibly useful, I think, to have the big NGOs aligning and agreeing, right? We could imagine a space where all of these different NGOs went out and developed their own policy guidance, and we're all sort of competing with each other to try to get us to use their different guidances. And so having all these NGOs collaborate to give us sort of a clear framework is incredibly useful. And so we've used that to refine our deforestation and conversion policy for our value chain. In particular, we did an update a few years ago to include conversion following the AFI guidance. But something that gets talked about less is that we've also used AFI to help set our internal policy for how we ensure natural ecosystems are protected on our sites, on all the lands that we own, in particular for our factories. So that was mentioned, Leah mentioned that in the list of priorities, but it's something that I think doesn't quite get enough attention, and we think is also important to make sure that we're walking the talk and we're protecting the things that are really in our control. We also use it, quite frankly, to judge the quality of our suppliers and our peers' commitments. It really helps to just have that quick assessment of, is this a good commitment? And we can use some of the things that Leah brought up, like having the cutoff dates that are in the past and at the appropriate time, like looking at the scope, like including conversion. It really helps us quickly gauge whether something is truly meaningful. So if you're a supplier on the call, take note. This is very much how we judge commitments, and something that we'll be expecting as part of our net zero roadmap. So the third thing I mentioned was really how AFI helps us as a key partner. I think some of you will be aware that Mars is really deeply invested in helping to lead the community or Consumer Goods Forum Forest Positive Coalition. It's really a theory of change that we've been really invested in driving, and AFI is deeply involved in that. Several years ago, when the CGF had a real reassessment moment based on not hitting 2020 targets, there was this realization that we have to do collective action. And to do that collective action, we need collective language. And so the AFI standardized definitions were really key to even being able to talk and have the right conversations. And AFI was very much a part of really assessing what's gone off here and how do we need to change our theory of change to get a different result. Through that work, CGF is taking those standardized definitions from AFI and using them to develop KPIs that are meaningful for business. And now we're working on aligning the methodologies to report on those KPIs so that we can really show our progress effectively. AFI has been deeply involved in the working groups and really has informed the ways that conversion are included in working group recommendations, on aligning our definitions, and making sure that the things that the working groups develop really align with AFI recommendations. So really see the hand of AFI in that work consistently, both as a sounding board and to give technical input when needed. So I said, I think one of the values of AFI is really having this one guidance agreed by all these key NGOs. I think it's a good example of NGO collaboration that helps us be more efficient in driving effective action. And one of the things that I think makes it strong is the ability of AFI to learn from and engage the private sector. And I'm very happy to be part of one of their groups that participate in that engagement. But there's always a need to keep bringing back the implementation insights into the guidance refinement process. And I think that's something that you really see coming to life with AFI. Things that I'm looking forward to in the future, where does AFI go next, is really actually doing more of what they do well and taking it further into standardizing definitions so that we're all super clear on what really is deforestation and conversion free, and making sure that we have some of the practical solutions to do that in supply chains as they are today, and really finding ways to really have a strong theory of change around how we address chain of custody. So definitely some work still to come in the future, but I think overall it's clear that AFI has really been a key partner and a very important reference for us as we work to address land use change impacts across our value chain.
Great, thanks so much, Autumn. That was such a great summary of sort of tying all of these various pieces together in terms of how Mars is linking deforestation, conversion, climate, nature, and its work with CGF. And I have some questions for you, and I'm sure that the audience does as well. So please put those in there, and we'll get to those towards the end. So thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. So now we're going to hear from Martha Stevenson, who is going to talk a little bit about the Science-Based Targets Initiative and the ways that the framework has been integrated into connecting the deforestation and conversion-free agenda with the work of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, so Science-Based Target Network. So Martha, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks Leah, and thanks Autumn for a great opener. Marco and I are going to tag team here and really cover kind of both sets of science-based targets and how they connect to the deforestation and conversion-free agenda, and of course specifically the Accountability Framework Initiative that we're talking about here today. Next slide. So I will be presenting first and focus on the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is climate targets. And then Marco will cover the Science-Based Targets Network, which is nature targets. So these are two separate but sister organizations. And just to give a little background to ground you, so the SBTi, this was started in 2014. We had 35 companies pilot the method in 2015 that we launched. And now we have over 5,300 companies who have committed to set SBTi targets. This was founded by 4 NGO organizations, including WWF, WRI, CDP, UN Global Compact, and then later we mean business. This is different than the Science-Based Targets Network, which was launched in 2019, really with a focus on nature, so covering land systems, freshwater systems, ocean systems, and biodiversity to complement the work that was being done on climate. And as folks know, we just launched in late May the first set of methods that will be piloted with 17 companies this year, and then we will roll into kind of more standardized validation after that time, after we learn from those pilots and update those methods, which Marco will cover. So those are the two organizations and the target setting frameworks that we'll be covering today. Next slide, please. So the FLAG guidance, Forest, Land, and Agriculture guidance, was published in September of 2022. It includes, a guidance document with criteria standard to all SBTi methods, a methodology document detailing how did we do the modeling, and also an Excel file that companies can input their greenhouse gas inventory, and then it helps them to model what their ambition needs to be for their target to align with 1.5-degree pathways. So it's finalized, it's out in the world and available for use. We've had a handful of companies set targets so far, and really excited to see that many of you are working on it or thinking about it, and we're all here to help and support through that process. So please reach out. FLAG covers a lot of both emissions reductions opportunities and removals, carbon removals opportunities within the model, including, the biggest one, of course, is stopping land use change, full stop, including deforestation and conversion. The second biggest wedge within the model is increasing forest restoration and silvopasture activities. But there's a whole bunch of other work in there, like shifting diets, addressing food loss and waste, decreasing, fertilizer and other agricultural emissions, enteric methane, et cetera. And also improving land management, soils and forest management to deliver on our climate goals. So it covers that full range of things. But today I'm going to focus just on the deforestation and conversion-free aspects. Next slide. So first, why did we develop the FLAG guidance? So from an NGO perspective, I work for WWF. We were looking at corporate emission setting platforms and saw this huge gap where 22% of global emissions were not being included within these corporate targets, or, some were including them. I know Mars was early on. There were a handful of companies including them, but largely these were absent from inventories. And of that 22%, half of that is land use change. So 11% of global emissions come from land use change and deforestation. And so we wanted to make sure we were closing this gap and getting this embedded into corporate inventories and then also into target setting. Around the same time, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol was looking to develop a standard on land use emissions and removals, and issued a survey with hundreds of companies responding saying, yes, this is guidance that we need. And here are the hotspot areas that we really need accounting guidance on. And of course, land use change was one of the big areas that companies called for. And then also WWF did a series of interviews with companies to understand where they were kind of with regard to deforestation and climate and the linkage between those. And what we heard repeatedly was that they were having trouble getting traction on some of their deforestation or improved management efforts because it didn't translate directly into their climate agenda. Like, we all know that it does, but they couldn't get that emissions connection. And so again, another reason that we pursued this work was to make sure we were, from a scientific perspective, really linking emissions targets with deforestation targets. So it was all of these kind of insights together that drove us to take on this work. Next slide. So within the FLAG guidance, how is deforestation and conversion covered? So it's two ways. The first is a traditional emissions reductions commitment, similar to how the rest of SBTi pathways work. So companies would do their inventory and identify how much deforestation and conversion is in their inventory in line with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol framework, which includes this 20-year look back period consistent with IPCC accounting methods. And then that inventory goes into the Excel spreadsheet that I showed you a snapshot of. And of course, you model those reductions in line with the IPCC pathways. So that is kind of your traditional SBTi approach to emissions reductions. We added a second component, and this is where working with Leah and the Accountability Framework Initiative really helped us in this work, is that because deforestation and conversion are half of the emissions in this sector, and because, you know, frankly, we missed the 2020 targets, you know, we've had a delay in really addressing this issue. We needed to make sure companies knew upfront how critical meeting their deforestation and conversion targets would be to achieving or having any chance of achieving their flag targets. And so in addition to the emission reduction, we also require a policy statement to be submitted, a no deforestation policy commitment. The sample language is there. But we're really aligning with the accountability framework in this guidance, where, you know, the recommended cutoff date is 2020, the mandatory target date is 2025. We're also recommending a no conversion and no peat burning commitment alongside of this for obvious reasons, given their connections to climate. So this is how deforestation and conversion are currently covered within the flag model. The other reason we added this policy commitment was because in the climate models from the IPCC, there's actually a long tail of emissions. It's a small tail, but it's a long tail for land use change emissions. And so we wanted to make sure that we were not going to keep kind of missing these target dates, but really fix firm in alignment with AFI that, look, 2025 is the target date, and this is where we really need to focus on addressing deforestation. Next slide. Two additional publications that I wanted to highlight here that were worked on in collaboration. One was led by Leah and the Accountability Framework, but included folks from Science Based Targets and Greenhouse Gas Protocol, where we really have tried to show companies how the three of these resources align across corporate targets, accounting, and disclosure. So I think a lot of questions folks have can be seen answered in these documents. And then also we worked on a piece with the climate champions about the relationship between net zero and zero deforestation goals. So I would just refer you to both of those. And then before I turn it over to Marco, I just wanted to highlight real quick, next slide, a new piece of science that was published just 2 weeks ago within the journal Nature. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. Titled Safe and Just Earth System Boundaries. And back one. This is an update of the 2009 Planetary Boundaries paper, and authored by, Rockstrom as lead author, but with a group called the Earth Commission that is a partner organization to the Science Based Targets Network. So we're moving into the nature space now. And I just wanted to highlight this quickly because you'll see, we have 8 Earth system boundaries that are outlined here. Red is the danger zone. The black dot is where the current state of the planet is with regard to that danger zone. So as you can see, we have surpassed 7 of the 8 planetary boundaries. And for natural ecosystems, this one we have surpassed by 5 to 15%. So basically, this is the latest science that tells us for land use change, we've actually passed that safe and just boundary. And we actually need to, stop immediately and really start restoring that 5 to 15% to keep a livable life on this planet. So I think I would encourage folks to take a look at this paper. It really gives you the background science on the trajectory we're on, which is not a positive one, and really increases the immediacy to take action. And with that, I will hand it over to Marco.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marta. And as it was anticipated, SBTN launched the first version of the target setting methodology for fresh water and land that complement those that already exist for climate via SBTi. The land targets are developed to incentivize the most important action needed to achieve nature goals in land systems, and they build upon, align with, and complement the guidance provided to companies by the accountability framework and by SBTi flag and other initiatives. And these are like the 3 land targets that we have designed to cover SBTN's mitigation hierarchy. So some of you may already be familiar with that, but is based on avoid future impacts, reduce current impacts, regenerate and restore ecosystem, and transform the system in which companies are embedded. The first of the targets is no conversion of natural ecosystems, which is quite intuitive. It directs companies to remove all deforestation and conversion of natural land from their operation and supply chain for hard and soft commodities that drive the conversion of natural ecosystem at both like global and regional scale. This target has been developed in close collaboration, obviously with Leah, with Marta, with Accountability Framework, all the organization of the Land Hub. And the target represents an adaptation of many of the principles, definition, expectation of the Accountability Framework that have been put into like a set of more prescriptive requirements that make this guidance a target setting methodology. And the cutoff dates in alignment with the expectation for the Accountability Framework and the SBTi flag is 2020. And the required target dates vary according to like the position of the company in the supply chain and the geographic of direct operation and sourcing. So we can understand that there is like a strong alignment, like the deforestation target date is as well 2025, as in the Accountability Framework and in SBTi flag, and the phase approach that we will see after with different target dates guides companies in this journey, acknowledging the different availability of data across supply chains. Our second target, instead, that I will cover not extensively today, highlights the role of large agricultural companies and their pressure on land. So science continues to tell us that we really need to reduce the amount of land that is dedicated to agricultural production if we are to meet climate and nature goals. And in line with this science, the land footprint reduction target has large agricultural companies and companies purchasing large volumes of these commodities to commit to a relative or absolute reduction of land occupation over time. Like the third target instead is like a little bit the most novel, but many of you will be familiar with the approach because it's based on engaging into landscape initiative to stimulate regenerative, restorative, and transformative actions around productive systems. This target asks companies to engage in materially relevant landscape initiatives. So landscape initiatives that are developed around landscapes that are connected to the direct operation of companies or to their main sourcing areas. And it is very important because it's asking to meaningfully engage in a multi-stakeholder landscape scale initiative to improve ecological and social conditions. And I spend a little bit more words on this after. Next slide, please. So it's important to give a context on how we have built these targets because they really are designed to increase the clarity, ambition, and or scope of existing initiatives that have not fully led to the transformational changes required to address climate change and nature laws. So they link to and build upon existing and emerging initiative and framework. They are not intended to lead to parallel or asynchronous processes, as we have heard also from Marta and from Leah, and they don't want to confuse or undermine existing and quality work that went on corporate sustainability. Some of the initiatives they are linked on that we have already mentioned is the Accountability Framework, the Science-Based Target, flag guidance, but also like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that is fundamental and it underpins like the second target, so the land footprint reduction target, in the way that the company can use statistical data to estimate the amount of land that is dedicated to the production of agricultural commodities that they produce or source, and also like global conventions, such as like the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification and the Convention on Biological Diversity. There is like a direct links between some of the Kunming-Montreal targets with the action that are going to be implemented by companies to achieve these land targets. Therefore, there is also the possibility to see how public authorities will really need committed private sector that delivers on nature and climate goals to meet national target. SBTi target provides corporate pathway that will ensure that companies are doing that part also in that regard. Next slide, please. So going back a little bit to the 3 targets, in this one, it's important to say that in comparison to before that SBTi started to work on this natural ecosystem target, we have now a map on that is defining what land is natural and what is not natural. So it provides the company a spatially explicit understanding of the extent of natural and non-natural lands in 2020. So this is a target setting tool, is a map that must be used in this context to set an SBTi target to achieve no conversion of natural ecosystems. Is not yet a tool that actually will provide a way to monitor how companies will actually implement action to meet the target objectives. And here I just say, and in the interest of time, we will not go to these details, but you are very welcome to read this table in the slides that will be shared or in the guidance provided by SBTi. You will see that there is this phase approach with different target dates for different stages of the value chain when it comes to no conversion. Understanding that beyond forest, there is less data to understand what conversion is occurring around the world due to like different drivers of conversion, and acknowledging that there is like this phase approach. We can now just go in the interest of time, skip like the next slides on target 2, land footprint reduction. Next slide, please. And we stop in the next one on landscape engagement. This is important to understand that this third target that requires company to prioritize landscape for engagement will be like the point in the SBTi land target version 1, where companies will deliver regenerative, restorative, and transformative practices. It's also like the target that links in supply chain metrics with collective action at the landscape level, so in and around direct operations and supply chain. And another intention of the target is to limit the amount of top-down direction that frameworks and initiatives like ours deploy around the world, and to create an enabling environment based on the strategies and level of ambition determined by those local multi-stakeholder processes that should ensure the representation of local needs and local visions on how to achieve nature and climate objectives are taken on board. Plus, these 3 targets are really developed together and in combination with SBTi flag climate target to address trade-offs that will be generated by a siloed implementation of specific targets and strategies. For instance, the landscape engagement target works to ensure that companies appropriately balance the need to use land more efficiently, as it is asked to achieve both no conversion and land footprint reduction, while avoiding unsustainable forms of agricultural intensification, such as overuse of fertilizer, chemical inputs, and so to eventually build resilience. Next slide, please. Here we can see like a summary on how, well, considering that the accountability framework is like fully embedded into both like the flag and the SBTi and land targets, we can see that also flag and the SBTi and land targets are really complementary to each other. Flag is asking to eliminate, as Marta presented extensively, all conversion emission. It has like a no deforestation commitment by 2025, and is also requiring no conversion, no pit burning target, ideally recommended for 2025 by 2030. So the land targets built on that and develop also like this approach for no conversion that is like for a producer at 2025, and then the scale approach that I was mentioning, adding up also the need to reduce pressure on nature and to deliver regeneration and restoration on working lands and natural ecosystems. And I stop here so we have like a little bit more time for the questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marco and Martha. I think that was a really great overview of how all of these pieces fit together in a really clear way. So thanks for all the great questions in the chat, and please feel free, or in the Q&A box there, please feel free to add them and upvote them. But I'll try to get as many of them answered by our panelists as we can today. So I have a question first for Autumn. You mentioned in your presentation about how you evaluate strong commitments by suppliers, and I would be great to hear you talk a little bit more about how that process works. I know that the Consumer Goods Forum really promotes a sort of supplier-based approach where you're sort of trying to push commitments upstream, and I'd love to hear you talk about how that works in practice a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, I would say that when we think about the Forest Positive Coalition theory of change, what's different this time around is really recognizing that just having a limited pool of committed companies source deforestation-free volumes will not get us where we need to be on protecting ecosystems. And so the theory of change we have now is much broader, that we need to go beyond just the volumes that individually companies purchase to two scales of work. One is looking through corporate supply chains to make sure that suppliers are actually committed to and activating against deforestation and conversion free across all of their business. And the second is really at the landscape scale and links back to the SBTi targets that Marco presented, which is really about working on how do we drive collaboration so that we can achieve, you know, deforestation-free landscapes. And the more we can join up all these different areas of deforestation-free, the better off our ecosystems will be. So I really see the work to figure out how to implement, you know, things that concept has been variously called clean supplier, deforestation-free supplier, forest positive supplier. So there's still a lot of, I think, debate going on amongst some of the leading companies and NGOs on really what's the best way to frame it and implement it. But it's really clear that this is certainly the next step that's coming on the journey, you know, both for the CGF and for companies like Mars.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how that continues to evolve. Maybe I may ask you one more quick question before I turn to other panelists. I know this is a complicated one, but just sort of a quick answer. There's some questions about how Mars is working to actually measure its deforestation footprint, and if there's specific approaches that that you can sort of recommend to others.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. So, and actually this ties back a little bit to one of the areas that I said I hope that we continue to improve as a collective, which is that right now it's not easy to measure deforestation, right? We generally take fairly custom approaches for different commodities, recognizing that they're in different landscapes that have different data sources available and different contextual elements that need to be taken into account. And so each commodity really develops its approach, typically using either collaboration with some of leaders in this space like ProForest or Ad Astra or Earthworm, and also leveraging really, where possible, industry collaboration. But one of the areas that I think is very important is really aligning those definitions. What is your threshold for calling something deforestation? And I think that is one of the areas that is still a bit more vague than it ought to be. And I hope that through some of the discussions that are going on in the CGF right now, as well as some work that I know WRI are doing on systems in this area, that will have hopefully a more cohesive answer as a global community within the next few years. I think regulation is also going to really push development in this space really rapidly, and I'm excited to see how that goes.
Great, thanks so much. Marco, I think a couple of questions that I have for you. There are some questions about sort of in the SBTi land target, there's sort of this based on a 2020 cutoff date, which is also recommended by the accountability framework. And I think there were some questions about what the role of a restoration is in sort of using that cutoff date to sort of achieve targets by 2025, 2027, 2030, really looking back to that 2020 mark. How does that work in the land targets?
Yeah, thank you, Leah. So I think that the question is related mostly to remediation. So what is happening to land when a company commit to SBT and land target? What should happen to the land that was converted after 2020? And that is like the piece of remediation. So the accountability framework already provide guidance on how remediation should be implemented, that it depends on whether implementation is about taking out of production the land that was converted and restoring it to the previous state, or like restoring like an equivalent piece of land in a similar landscape, or restoring, when also that is not possible, restoring it elsewhere. What we need to do in SBTN, and we didn't do it yet, is to make out of this type of indication something, a prescriptive approach, to say SBTN will define when companies absolutely need to take this first type of remediation, when they are allowed to remediate at the level of the same landscape, or when actually there are such circumstances and conditions for which it is not relevant due to like social perspectives, or due to the fact that anyway the converted ecosystem cannot be quickly restored, and other parameters. Therefore, companies could also be allowed to remediate elsewhere. So this piece of work is like going to be a complex one. It requires all the organization in the accountability framework initiative network, ideally folks from like the Consumer Goods Forum and the First Positive Coalition, industry player, etc., to define an approach that is scientifically sound, and on which also we have organizational and political buy-in. So more to come is one of our objectives during the piloting period with the 17 companies that Marta was describing.
Great, thanks so much. I might take one of these for myself. It looks like it's upvoted about a question about how the accountability framework can be used by financial institutions. That's a great question. It's something that we are spending a lot of time working on right now, because we're increasingly recognizing that financial institutions are really essential players in sort of incentivizing change in this area. So a couple of pieces, and one is that the framework can be used directly by financial institutions to create tools by which to screen their portfolio, their investments, their lenders, so to see if they're meeting criteria for being deforestation free, for having processes in place to build and maintain responsible supply chains. So the framework can be used directly to create criteria. A number of our coalition members work really carefully on this topic. So Global Canopy is a coalition member that has been working to develop guidance directly for financial institutions and how they can use the framework in policy development and in sort of moving their portfolios towards a deforestation and conversion-free space. Ceres is another one of our coalition members that is working with investors to try to help them integrate the framework into their supplier engagement, into their engagement with the companies in which they invest. So we're increasingly developing guidance throughout our coalition to help financial institutions use the framework to really align the signals that companies are getting from sort of all sides on this. So that's a really great question. Let me go ahead and see what else we've got. I think we probably have time for one more in here. Let's see. Got one more question for Autumn in here. We have a question of how do companies who haven't set any commitments yet start the process? So what's the first step for companies who are just coming into the space that Mars has been in for so long?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think if you're here, you've already taken the first step because you're clearly learning about the AFI, and that's a great place to start. You know, I think the other first step that's really fundamental is knowing your business, right? Taking the time to understand what are the supply chains that you source from, you know, where are you sourcing from countries that are higher risk, and really starting to understand what's going on that we need to address, and then using that to build the proposal to the business of what targets you should set and the strategy for how you actually go about tackling the worst issues first.
Great, thanks. And I agree. Thanks for hopefully asking that question, for joining this webinar. And feel free to reach out to any of us if for moving forward. So great. I would like to thank all of our panelists today for sharing all of the incredible work that you all are doing to really move forward in this space through corporate commitments, through developing climate targets, nature targets, really helping all of us move forward the goals that companies should be setting. So really appreciate all of your time, and thanks everyone for attending. And we will try to answer the rest of your questions. We'll have the answers to those on our website together with the recording and the slide deck. So everything will be there for you. Thank you again for your time today, and thanks again to our panelists. And please stick around for a second after we close this to answer a quick survey. So thanks so much everyone for your time.
Thank you.